Okay, I'm just making a very short video about powder selection choice, and I'm just going to be doing this basically off the top of my head. I just got finished doing some reloading for my 6.5 Creedmoor, and I've mentioned in past videos that I was using Alliant Reloader 16, and that powder for me seems to be working the best. I'm getting very good accuracy with it. I'm also getting very good SDs, and I'm getting substantially more velocity than I am with AR2209, which any Americans and even Europeans would know as Hodgdon's H4350. And basically, from all the testing I've seen online, where people out of the US have run it against 2209 in temperature testing, basically ambient temperature, cold temperature, and then hotter temperatures. They've controlled those variables for both powders, and they've shot strings at cold, ambient, and hot. Alliant Reloader 16 actually, from the top of my head, appeared to be more stable than H4350, so AR2209, in all temperature extremes. So for me, that means that if I reload here today, it's basically the start of spring almost, or is here in Australia where I am. If I reload now, there's going to be very minimal shift in velocities between the temperature now. I don't know what the actual temperature is today, but basically between the temperature now, let's say 24 degrees or 25 degrees, and say 45 degrees if I ever go out hunting at my uncle's properties out sort of in the further to the middle of Australia. Gets even hotter out there. It gets into the 50s at some 50 degrees Celsius at some stages, but that's a big consideration. For a long time I believed that the ADI powders, so the Hodgdon extreme powders, were better at those handling the temperature extremes, because off the top of my head they're a single base powder, whereas most other powders like the Hodgdon non-extreme range, Alliant, Winchester ball powders, all that, I think they're mostly double base powders. And whilst the double base gives you high velocity, it definitely has its drawbacks with handling temperature extremes and temperature changes. But for me, choosing the Alliant Reloader 16 after I saw the temperature testing done out of the US, I can't remember exactly who did it, but I believe it was on long range only or long range hunting forums, something like that. You'd have to look it up for yourself. It does fairly well temperature wise. So just Alliant Reloader 16 for me was the choice. It is dearer to purchase in Australia, roughly $15 dearer, but you get and you also get roughly 45 to 50 grams less per container than you do the ADI powders. But it's worth it because I don't have my phone on me, which is what I record all my loading data on. It's roughly 150 to 200 feet per second increase in velocity, and that people might go, oh, okay, it's 150 feet per second, 200 feet per second increase in velocity. That doesn't really matter because your elevation is just a simple like ballistic solution to adjust for your elevation. That's okay, but that 150 to 200 feet per second increase in velocity makes a massive difference to your wind calls. What that allows you to do is it allows for a more generous bracketing of targets at long range, and it allows the load to be much more forgiving at long range when you're bracketing a wind call. Now you have to run it through your particular loads through a ballistic solution provider. Like there's quite a few. I use my Kestrel. I also use the Hornady 4DOF app. I think JBM online, you can still use that. It'll calculate out your wind calls for you. So the high velocity allows for a lot less wind, like drift at range. It also, for hunting, like in my Creedmoor, I use it for targets, plus it's also basically a sit and shoot hunting rifle. You don't want to be carrying it too far, even though with my biathlon sling that I've got for it, you basically don't even know you've got it on your back. Again, you have to look into it. If anyone's looked at any PRS type shooting, anything like that, the higher velocity basically on your wind calls, you'll outshoot yourself. If you're shooting the same load at a lower velocity and it's just as accurate as the higher velocity load, you will outshoot yourself with a high velocity load every single time. It's as simple as that. If any of you have access to the Tremor, any of the Tremor or Horus reticles, anything like that, some of the reticles allow you to, or most of them actually allow you to bracket for your wind calls, basically using hold-off points. That bracketing becomes more generous. You can hit a target easier with a wider bracket over a wider range of wind speed difference or variance than you could with a slower load. That's how that works. Also, the other thing to note on talking about H4350 or AR2209 versus Reloader 16 that I've noticed is Reloader 16, even though 2209 and Reloader 16 are very close in burn rate, Reloader 16 must have a much higher bulk density, meaning it's denser powder, so you get more weight in the same volume of your case than you do with 2209. This is what allows you to get the higher velocities. Also, it must have it's a very similar burn rate, but it must be slightly slower. I think that's what it shows when you look at it again. I don't have anything sitting in front of me to confirm, but that's just my reasoning behind how it would work. Because you can definitely fit more Reloader 16 in the case than you can with 2209. All my testing with 2209, I maxed out my case fill. I was definitely like crushing powder, seeding projectiles. But with Reloader 16, whilst I'm still using a slightly compressed load, I still am not filling the case anywhere near as much as I am with 2209. Like, it's a visible difference in how much your difference is in basically case fill ratio between the two, just looking at them. I think that's pretty much it to cover with Creedmoor. With the 300 Norma, I started off using 208 grain ELDMs, which I was running with Rotumbo powder, which is AR2225 here in Australia, and it is AR2225. It's actually Rotumbo. All the Hodgdon Extreme powders, or most of them to my knowledge, are made here in Australia by ADI, then sent to America, packaged, and I believe the Australian powder, like the Australian packaging powders, are actually re-imported into Australia via the distributor here, which is, I believe, Winchester, Australia, and then distributed around like that. But using Rotumbo with the 208 grain LDMs, I got good case fill ratio, I got good velocities, and I got good SDs with the 208s. When I switched to the 225 grain LDMs, I didn't get the SDs that I wanted, or the extreme spreads, which is another way to look at it. Basically, I couldn't get the standard deviation down below, I think the lowest I actually got for a 5-shot string was 16 feet per second standard deviation, which just isn't good enough, in my opinion, because I'm sort of a perfectionist when I reload like that. I was using the same case prep practices and methods as I was with the 208 grain LDM loads using 2225, and like I said, I just could not get the SDs down, which led me to switch powders. I looked at what others were using online. There's a few forums where they talk about 300 Norma mag reloading. What else? Not only did I look at what they were using like powder wise in 300 Norma mag, I also looked at what people were using and that roughly the same case size and volume for the loading for anything around that case volume. And a lot of guys were talking about the American powders again, like Alliant Reloader 33. They said it's actually substantially more temp. It's an unstable powder regarding temperature. They said it's still not too bad in that case volume size. I think they said it come out to be about 0.7 feet per second per degree Fahrenheit. I think 2225 and those class powders come out to be roughly 0.2 or 0.3, something like that. So substantially better, like temperature stability wise. But like I said, 2225 wouldn't give me the SDs I wanted, or the extreme spreads. And a lot of guys running the 338 Lapua, which is a longer case with a bit more case capacity obviously than the 300 Norma mag. They were using H1000, which is again AR2217, just in a different bottle with a different label on it. They were also using that in 338 Edge. I remember that, and it was one of their favourite powders for consistent velocities. So I thought, okay, I can get access to that, so I'll give that a go. My accuracy node off the top of my head, again, I don't have the data sitting in front of me because I left my phone in the other room, but I dropped roughly 80 feet per second on the accuracy node velocity wise from using 2225, but I gained an extreme spread of 3 feet per second, standard deviation of 1 feet per second over the standard deviation of 16 feet per second with AR2225. I actually lost roughly 120 feet per second in maximum velocity before I pressured out between the two powders. But again, losing the velocity to gain a SD of 1, an extreme spread of 3 feet per second, I think most people would probably consider worth it in that case, considering the difference between the two in extreme spread and standard deviation. The case fill was slightly less. It's still a very slight compressed charge, but it was slightly less compressed than the AR2225 load. Again, I don't have the data sitting in front of me. I think it was roughly a 2 grain difference in powder between the two. Don't quote me on that if you're looking at any reloading data. Again, that probably just comes down to the bulk density difference between the two powders. There's a slight difference again in burning rate, stuff like that. But so long as you're using a powder that roughly fills 100% of your case, then that's where you should be looking around, regardless of what you're loading, what you're using it for. That gives you the best ignition. You don't get any flashover in the case because all the powder is held against the primer, or the primer flash hole in the case. That's what I've found anyway. Bringing it back to powder selection for anything, you should be looking at case fill, burning rate, and projectile weight in that case. And you're going to match your burning rate to your projectile weight, and secondary, you'd be looking at your case fill. So lighter projectiles, typically you'd want to run, or you usually would be looking at a faster burning powder for that case and the powders that are usable in that case. Heavier projectiles, obviously you go to a slower powder. The 300 Norma mag for me was the opposite. I don't know why. It could just be that particular case. I could have just got lucky finding a good load for the 208 grain ELDM with the AR225 powder. I was using the same primers in both instances as well. I never messed with primers. I don't usually worry about that. Little insect flying around here. So yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on powder selection. Match your burning rate to your projectile weight choice in that case and the available powders. That's what I do anyway. I believe if you Google Hodgdon extreme powders or equivalents, they actually state also which ADI powders are the Hodgdon powders, because I have seen that before on the internet, where Hodgdon have stated which powders line up to their equivalent ADI powders. Again, they're the same powder, different bottle, different label. That's it. Looking at your burning rate and your case fill, you should be looking at roughly, you wouldn't want to load anything that's got less than 85% case fill. Not all manuals list that. ADI don't list that on their website. Off the top of my head, pretty sure the only manual that does list it is the Nosler manual. I think they give you a pretty good idea of case fill ratio. But if you're loading, just again Google powders, popular powder choices for a particular cartridge. That's what I do. And basically, if I've got that powder, I start working with it. If it doesn't give me the results I want, I'll again have a look at what other people are using in that cartridge and projectile weight range, and if I can get that powder, then I'll switch to that and see how that does for me. Okay, I think that pretty much covers it. Most people know how to pick a powder for their cartridge. Just open your reloading manual. They'll have, for that projectile, well, I've got Hornady, Nosler, Spear, Barnes, Lee manuals. I've even got a few of the Australian ones like Nick Harvey manuals, stuff like that. I think I've got 2 of them. But yeah, also check whenever new manuals are released, they do change the formulation of powders every so often. So if you've got one of the first, like, one of the manuals I don't have is like Lyman manuals, stuff like that. But I know there's substantial volumes of certain manuals. Like I think Hornady's up to number 10. If you've got a Hornady edition 1 reloading manual, the data in there is going to be different than the Hornady 10th edition, or vice versa. It doesn't matter which reloading company it is who offer reloading manuals. There will be a difference in data. That's often down to the formulation of powders slowly changing over time and what that does to the pressure developed when testing loads. So if you've got an old manual, it's substantially old manual, it might be worth updating to a newer manual. Again, Hodgdon have it online, Alliant have it online, ADI have it online. I think Barnes offer reloading manual online. Berger, I don't know if Berger still offer reloading data online. They used to. I have one of their manuals as well, so I don't really have to worry about that. The only other thing worth really mentioning with reloading would be loading data for projectile weights. The only time I personally, and I can't advise you to do this, I wouldn't take anything you see on the internet or YouTube or any forum with a grain of salt. Cross-reference everything and see if it sort of matches up. But I don't worry about changing min and max charges for projectiles based on brand of projectile, so long as they're still the same weight. or very close to the same weight. I
So-
would not substitute monolithic projectile data for cup and core projectiles, or vice versa. I wouldn't use cup and core data to load monolithics. I'd specifically go and look for that manufacturer's data to load those monolithics, or look for other monolithic data to use with those monolithics. The difference in this, because again I don't have the Hornady manual sitting in front of me, Hornady offer the GMX, Nosler offer the E-tip projectiles. I'm not sure if in their manuals they stipulate it, like data specifically for those projectiles, because I do have the Hornady manual, I also have the nozzle manual and the Barnes, but I don't have them sitting in front of me right now, so I can't look at it and tell you. That's just something else to keep in mind. I have, from what I've heard and what I've seen, there is a difference in minimum and maximum loads, and it can be substantial between monolithic and cup and core projectiles, even if they're of the same weight. So if you're a big proponent of Barnes projectiles, buy the Barnes manual. Look it up online, because I'm pretty sure they do have it available online. At least their newer data anyway. I was on their website not long ago, and I'm pretty sure they did have a tab for the newest data that they have available. That may only be for certain cartridges, like the newest cartridges that they're making, or they're making data for the newest cartridges that have been released, or most recent cartridges being released. But yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Pretty much, so long as you're looking at a reloading manual, you can't really go wrong if you're using that projectile or weight projectile in that powder. It wouldn't be unsafe, but there may be cases where you can tweak it to get the best results possible. Say with my example of the 300 Norma mag and the 6.5 Creedmoor. Simple switch, even though Alliant Reloader 16 is very similar in burn rate to H4350, they're sort of in the same class range. Just that slight difference in bulk density and that slight difference in burning rate gives a massive difference in velocity performance. And apparently now it's not even at the loss of temperature sensitivity. They maintain the temperature sensitivity. So there's some good powders coming out that they're developing. They keep updating them. So yeah, keep your eyes out, find good loads and good shooting.